Okay, so let's get started. Welcome to this panel. Sharing is caring. We will be sharing our coffees today with you and our ideas. Of course, the topic is very, very hot at the moment. The European data strategy aims at creating a single market for data, and we are in a moment in which the Data Governance Act is almost going to be applicable in September. It will be on the 24th of September. The free flow of non-personal data regulation, the Open Data Directive will be complemented probably with the Data Act. It's a very interesting time to discuss about the importance of sharing data and the importance of doing that in a proper way. And today, with our distinguished panelists, we will investigate, especially and focus on a cutting-edge privacy-enhancing technology that is called synthetic data, so generative algorithms that are used to anonymize data. And let me introduce, therefore, our distinguished guest, Elisabetta Biasin, researcher in law at the Leuven Center of IT and IP Law, with a special interest in healthcare. Dr. Anna Zeiter, Chief Privacy Officer and Associate General Counsel at Privacy eBay. And also data and A Managing Director and Board Member of eBay, and Dr. Daniele Panfilo, CEO of Aindo. I see that he's coming on the stage also directly from Paris, Dr. Félicen Vallet, who is the Deputy Head of Technology Experts Department at CNIL, so the French Data Protection Authority. Thank you very much for being here with us. So I want to not to waste time to keep enough for your questions. I know that there will be many, and I would like to leave the floor to Dr. Biasin for a general framework on anonymous data, pseudonymized data, and synthetic data, and what we are expecting with the recent sentences of the Court of Justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning, all. Okay. So my name is Elisabetta Biasin, and today I will bring a little bit introduce the panel with some general frameworks on synthetic data, and I will bring the academic perspective, as I am from Leuven. I will talk also about synthetic data in European health data spaces, and I will offer some conclusion and further discussion for the prosecution of the panel. So first of all, we are talking about synthetic data, and it's becoming a hot topic. But actually, we know that it's a hot topic. It's really important that it's becoming an important aspect. But the first time that we have heard, at least to my knowledge, about synthetic data is 1993 with a paper by Rubin. And as a lawyer, the first thing that I always want to do is to find definitions and references in the EU-level legislation. So, for example, if you look at the GDPR, you cannot find, of course, the definition of synthetic data or any reference thereof. So the OECD defined synthetic data as an approach to confidentiality. And the EDPS also contain a very interesting definition of synthetic data. I will go very quickly on definition because the second part of the panel will talk more about that. And most importantly and most relevantly, the Data Governance Act includes a reference to synthetic data, defining them as privacy-preserving methods that could contribute to a more privacy-friendly processing of data. Today, to offer some insights about and be less theoretical about what is synthetic data and their use in general, I brought the healthcare use case. In healthcare, there are many uses of synthetic data. You can find, for example, algorithm testing for some specific AI applications. So it's really, really, really useful, or also for simulations and predictions. I brought an example as I am involved in a project concerning virtual clinical trial and how this could happen. And here, synthetic data, they could really drive a difference in a way that if you use synthetic data to train algorithm to produce and to have a virtual simulation to virtual patients, you are using synthetic data, and the utility there is that you could test virtually medical devices or medicinal product onto a virtual population. And this is a little bit something that the research is really trying to approach in order to meet other challenges of research for clinical trial medicinal products. So, for example, to address some population that are more difficultly, it's more difficult to test on them. So, for example, pregnant women or other. But what are the legal implications of synthetic data? So the first implication that we, of course, as CPDP attendants, we think they are relevant for is data law. And of course, the issue of pseudonymization and anonymization. Here, I would like to signal a very interesting paper by my colleagues, Fontanillo and Oppen and Elby, where they basically offer a very clear overview of how synthetic data could fall within pseudonymized or anonymized data. And the main issue there, also in light of the guidance, is that it's also a problem of identifiability and re-identification. And the most recent developments, of course, is the latest ECJ decision on anonymization that, of course, I think will change a little bit also in favor of anonymization. And then, of course, the synthetic data are really intertwined with data minimization and purpose limitation. And I'm also into the research of accuracy because it's my PhD topic, so I see many links with that. But synthetic data are used also very important, very useful in a way to remedy to paucity of annotated data, and in that way it's a mean to improve data quality and basically to improve the quality of data in a given data set. But synthetic data is not just about data protection as we would think about only, but it's also about the reconceptualization of data in a broader manner, and the way that data are used, are generated by whom and from whom, and the way they will have to be done. So in a way, I think it's also a broader discussion about what synthetic data mean. And of course, I think they will be also increasingly relevant for AI law in the requirements, for example, on accuracy on data quality. But what I wanted to bring here as an idea is that synthetic data, it's really important that they are tackled from a data perspective, but I think the problems go and the issues, the legal implications go beyond data law. So as I am involved in healthcare, I wanted to bring some healthcare related examples. And the first of all is, for example, medical devices regulation and clinical trials regulation. So in the first cases with medical devices regulation, the use of synthetic data now is increasingly considered for testing, as I was saying before, virtually on virtual population. But at the same time, the use of synthetic data, in my opinion, is not regulated by regulators in a way that is sufficiently clear for the persons that are trying to go in this direction. And another problem, in my opinion, is concerns in silico trials, which are, again, the testing on virtual population. And also in that respect, we see the new pharmaceutical strategy. We can see that in silico trial will play a role. And in my opinion, also in that case, it's needed a more clear regulation on how this synthetic data should be used. Secondly, I think when we use synthetic data for a specific model against which you have to try it out on, it's also a problem of model credibility and trust. So how much are you going to trust this model? How much you're going to trust the data that are inside? Because ultimately these are the means against which we are testing a safety of a given device, which could be medical device, but also further. And also, I think I wanted to go beyond the law and bring some ethical perspectives. So synthetic data, one of the main points that are brought in the literature is that synthetic data are really important against the principle of justice because they help to address population underrepresentation, especially on clinical trials. So this is also a really important point. They're really useful for that. But I wanted also to report that this is quite debated in doctrine because some others say yes, they are helpful, but still they still in some way amplify bias. But in my opinion, it's a good start to see that it's nice to address underrepresentation. And the second aspect I wanted to bring here is the principle of non-maleficence and the fact that, as I was saying before, that synthetic data could help, in a way, but also when clinicians, when persons that are developing this technology for healthcare use case, it's really important that there is an ethical manner that they are being used in order for them to not be misused in a development of a technology. So I think these are two ethical points that could be relevant here. And today I wanted also to bring the case of the European Health Data Space, which is one of the first deliverables following the European data strategy by the European Commission. And I thought, yes, it's a very interesting use case. And the question that I wanted to bring to this panel today is whether synthetic data will facilitate health data sharing in the European Health Data Space. So as a health researcher, I've been researching a lot about the interaction between GDPR, Data Governance Act, and the European Health Data Space. And in my opinion, synthetic data are quite a relevant aspect, an important aspect to consider with. For those that are less familiar with the European Health Data Space, it includes rules and mechanisms for the secondary use of health data, which can include the personal and non-personal data, and therefore also synthetic data. These are some purposes of secondary use of data. So, for example, you can see that could be very useful for scientific research, innovation activities, training and testing of algorithms, etc. So this is the list of the purposes, although as you may, those who are more familiar with the European Health Data Space know that these purposes are also being criticized a little bit for their broadness. This is a little bit another recapitulation of how important it is to consider the secure processing environment and where exactly the data sharing would happen when you have data sharing for secondary use. And you could see the health data access bodies or data holder granting access to a natural legal person requesting data access through a data access application. And the place where this could happen is the secure processing environment. And the secure processing environment it has some specific requirements, one of which is Article 44, which is about data minimization and purpose limitation. So in a way, in the rules foreseen in Article 44 is the first rule is that you should have anonymized data to have health data sharing, and one if the purpose can be achieved with that. Sorry, but I cannot see the slide very well from there. And the purpose of, if this purpose of processing cannot be achieved, then it's also, you can provide access through pseudonymized data. And there is a prohibition for data user to re-identify the electronic health data, which I think is really important, and a guarantee for pseudonymized data when there's a request that should the request should be additional, including the description of compliance with GDPR legal basis and information of ethical aspects in the processing. So I think this is really concerning synthetic data because they both qualify as anonymized or pseudonymized data. And I think in light of the recent case law, most likely industry will consider them as anonymized data. So as a conclusion, First of all, I think the point I would like to bring today is that synthetic data has several legal implications. Of course, for the purpose of today's discussion in data protection, in data law, but also beyond. And I think it's really important to take in consideration a sectorial perspective. And there are also ethical and societal implications I think should be considered, that about power, as we said, about justice, but also about, in healthcare we have seen the Hippocratic Oath and the principle of doing not harm. Oh, this is my, I'm almost on time. So some recommendations for today, in my opinion, are the following. So the first, I think legal doctrine would be very interesting to consider which are the effects of the latest ruling of the ACJ on synthetic data in their use, especially. For the legislator, I think that the guarantees that we have seen before for pseudonymized data should be extended to anonymized data, in as much anonymous data will play an increasing role in a health data space, and industry is likely to consider that increasingly given the latest ACJ. So I think the guarantees of showing compliance with the GDPR, for example, could be extended in that respect. And finally, for further discussion and to continue the panel, I think that given the first 2 points, synthetic data will play an increasing role in general in the European data space, but in general in data sharing. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much to Elisabetta Biasin for this great framework of the situation of the legal framework that we face at the moment in promoting synthetic data, and I would like to leave the questions and debate later on. So I would like to leave the floor now to Anna Zeiter, as we said, the Chief Privacy Officer of eBay. And I will ask to Anna another perspective, from a corporate perspective. So what are the data that you actually would like to share and or to receive, and how synthetic data may be of help in this regard?
Absolutely. Thank you. But I think now we have a critical mass. Maybe we can do the polling tool right now. We prepared a quick polling tool. If you can switch to the other screen, because we would like to also know a little bit from you. Okay. If you go to menti.com and then use the code 4547053. Now we can understand a little bit what your experience with synthetic data is, and afterwards I'm happy to give a little bit insights what we're doing on the eBay side or what I'm seeing actually in the industry. So first question, does your organization already use synthetic data? The answers are yes, no, I don't know. I actually never heard about synthetic data before, but I'm happy to learn more. So one, oh, that's interesting. Yes, no, I don't know. Good that you're attending this session here today. No, but interesting. 4 people said already yes. Good. I don't know. Okay, I think we have a good overview. Next slide, please. Next question is, if yes, for which use cases does your organization use synthetic data? I think the 6 people who said yes, maybe you can add a little bit of color. Is it training purposes? Is it market research? Is it like fraud prevention, fraud detection? This is actually a word cloud. So, imaging, research, yes, good. We see the same at eBay. Training, research, AI training, yes, AI training, actually a big thing. Fraud detection, fraud prevention. This is what I would add from my side. Anything else? Still people typing. I have 2 more slides on polling. So next slide, please. What are your main concerns regarding the use of synthetic data? I think this is for all of you. I think we just heard the great introduction. What are main concerns? Like, I think one main concern is it still considered as personal data, as anonymized data, pseudonymized data? I think there's still a little bit of legal ambiguity. Accuracy, yes, good question. Accuracy, can we get actually the same insights as if we would use the real data set? GDPR scope, yes. Quality, accuracy. Bias, yes, very good points. Maybe. Okay. Let's go to the next slide and the last slide. Did your organization ever hear from a supervisory authority regarding synthetic data? Yes, no, I don't know. Did you ever receive an investigation letter or questionnaire from a data protection authority? Yes, oh, that's interesting. I don't want to point you out, so I don't want to know who you are. No, I don't know. One, that's really, really interesting. So which means that regulators are starting to get slowly into that area. Good, wonderful. Yes, no, I don't know. Okay, perfect. Maybe we can switch back to the main slide, but that was really helpful to understand where we all stand. I think we are all a bit in a similar situation. What I can tell you a little bit from eBay. So as you know, eBay is the global online marketplace. We have the US headquarters actually in Silicon Valley, but we have also a very big presence in Europe. Big markets for us in Europe are Germany, UK, France, Italy, Spain, and I think Belgium is also an important area for us. So what are the potential use cases for companies? What I'm seeing at eBay, what do I see in the industry? Of course, when you want to do big data analytics, you want to train models, it's of course a bit dangerous or tricky. I don't want to say dangerous, but tricky sometimes from a privacy perspective to use real data sets. So this is why I see in the industry that especially for training purposes, training of new functionalities, training of new tools, training of fraud prevention measures, fraud detection tools, synthetic data is more and more being used. I can list another couple of examples. Sometimes we share data with universities, like big data sets, because we are asking researchers to do research on our data sets to understand market developments, like trends in general. And it's always a big thing for us if we hand over these huge data sets. You can imagine it only makes sense to do market research if you hand over big data sets, because otherwise the insights are not relevant. But of course, if we would hand over, for example, data of an entire country, like, hey, this is all of our US data, or the data globally of one vertical. So a vertical is, for example, electronics or home and garden or fashion, for example, or collectibles. So this is actually a big risk at one point, because if we would hand over those data sets and if they get into the wrong hands of potential competitors, then we would end up in trouble, because then someone else, a potential competitor, could use the data actually to build something similar or to understand, oh, these items are top selling, this is a bit overpriced at eBay, this is underpriced, whatever. So we are always this is the balance we always have to take whenever we hand over big data sets for analytical purposes, for research purposes. We always try to limit the number, but at the same time, that also limits the insight. So this is why synthetic data could be and is a very good option. Of course, we see downsides. I come to that in a bit, but the benefits are actually huge. So I said market research, the research of trends, training of fraud prevention, fraud detection models, training of new AI functionalities, and even the modeling of synthetic images. It's a huge opportunity, because you can imagine on our website we have a lot of pictures, people and faces and fashion with electronics and stuff for marketing purposes. And sometimes these pictures are changing according to the marketing campaign. And then it's also a good option to use synthetic image information or synthetic images, because then we don't have to ask for a license agreement. We don't have the issue that some people might say, oh, I'm withdrawing my consent, for example. We don't have IP issues. We don't have confidentiality issues. So this is also a good upside. Another benefit is privacy by design by default. So we can say, look, we do the best we can do in terms of privacy by design by default. These are actually the main use cases I see, but there are probably other use cases like analytics in general, as I said, market and machine learning, testing and training of algorithms in general, testing purposes, and testing out new functionalities. Benefits are, as we heard, privacy by design, privacy by default. You can probably argue in some cases that it's not personal data at all, which puts you away from the GDPR scope. This is one of the words we just saw, GDPR scope. Yes, this is the best benefit. We have less IP issues, because if we create, for example, synthetic images, then we wouldn't have any IP issues. Confidentiality, security is also a benefit, because imagine we would hand over a big data set to a US university. This is what we've considered last year, actually, to hand over a big data set to Stanford University to say, look, we would like to understand e-commerce trends. But then it's a huge risk, right? If you hand over this data set and you have people working at this university as researchers, and afterwards they only need to have one USB stick, download it, and then go afterwards with that to Shopify or to any other competitor and say, hey, I have the eBay data of the entire US marketplace. So whenever we hand over these big data sets, we have to make sure that this is a safe environment. Sometimes we even do security background checks with the researchers at the university. And this is why synthetic data could be a good option to still do the research, still hand over the data, but actually don't do it with the real data, but with synthetic data. But, so now I come to potential downsides. Accuracy is actually a big question, because when you hand over big data sets, for example, to a university, you want to gather insights, and the big question is how valid are the insights if I'm not handing over the real data set, but actually synthetic data set. I think this also depends a bit on the way how the synthetic data is being produced. I'm not a super expert in that, but there are different ways of producing synthetic data. I think the biggest concern that I've read is that sometimes synthetic data is taking away the outliers. So whenever you have a real data set, you have sometimes outliers, like crazy data where you're like, oh, what's that? And the risk with synthetic data is that there are less outliers, which can make it difficult, for example, for fraud detection, fraud prevention use cases, to actually find the real, the real interesting cases. Then another point is someone needs to synthesize or produce the synthetic data. So companies sometimes do that in-house, so there is no additional privacy issue. But if you are not able in-house to produce a synthetic data set, you have kind of a similar issue, because you need to transfer the data set to a third party, and the third party then needs to create synthetic data out of that real data set. So then again, you need to make sure that you have proper data protection agreements in place, you can trust the people, you have confidentiality agreements in place. So this is always the big question. I think we tend sometimes to forget, like someone needs to create the synthetic data, and for the creation of synthetic data, you actually need access, or in most cases at least, to the real data set. Outliers and then bias. So whenever synthetic data is being produced, we don't know for sure in all the cases if the bias from the real data set will be copied, if new biases will be added, or if maybe biases will be eliminated. This is also something that probably over the time we will see with more advanced models. What can regulators do? I'm very happy to hear your presentation in a bit. I think to get a bit more guidance, I know that some regulators are already a bit on the forefoot and publishing guidances and opinions on synthetic data. I think it would be good to see more, and especially to give companies a bit more of assurance, like what kind of, for example, privacy assurance assessments we can do to make sure, hey, if we use this tool, then the outcome, the synthetic data set, is not being considered as personal data. This would be good from a company perspective, because then companies would invest more in those tools if we would have actually the legal security at the end. Thank you, sir. Okay.
Thank you so much, Zyder, for the special effects at the beginning, and also for shedding so much in terms of lights on the potential usages of synthetic data. There is a lot of appetite. It looks like there are some risks. As lawyers, as experts, we need to focus on the risks, and you mentioned the importance of the regulators in giving us guidance. I saw that there is already one person here that had the possibility to interact with a regulator, but we can all interact now with Félicen Vallet. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Carlo, and thank you very much to Elisabetta and Anna for this. For the previous presentation that set very well the framework for this discussion. I wanted to introduce this little presentation by linking the two concepts of data anonymization and data synthesis, and questioning whether, well, they are the same or not, and how they are linked, because, well, we've seen that on a data protection standpoint, the two are quite entangled. So the title was, is it the same, different? How do we read this? And yes. So, well, I wanted to start with definitions, but actually you all know this. But just to come back on what Elisabetta said in her presentation, indeed there is no definition of synthetic data in the GDPR. That is true. But at the same time, there's not also really a definition of what is anonymous data. And in fact, you have to find a definition of anonymous data by looking into what is personal data and saying, well, if it's not personal data, then it is anonymous data, pretty much. And the only way you'll find the mention of the word anonymous is in the recital 26. If I'm not mistaken. So, but the text speaks a lot of pseudonymization, as you know. So that was my first remark, and now I wanted to introduce a bit, before going into the synthetic data topic, what we do about anonymization at the CNIL. So first of all, wanted to say that it is critical for DPS, as you know, to be able to assess whether a data set is anonymous or not, and this for very obvious reasons. Because first of all, it falls out of the scope of GDPR, and if a supposedly anonymous data set is not, then it's very much complicated to somehow bring it back under the GDPR umbrella. And also, second point that is might be obvious for you who are a professional of data protection, but not necessarily for the general public, is that anonymization itself is a data processing, because you have personal data in entry, and the output you'll have anonymized data, but you have to process this data, and accordingly you have to follow the principles of GDPR and have a legal basis, define a finality, etc., etc. Also, I wanted to add that at the CNIL we have some national specific powers that have been given to our institution by the Digital Republic Bill that was voted in 2016, and that brings a new mission, that brought a new mission to the CNIL about certification of anonymization processes. with the idea that it would be good to have, as Anna just mentioned earlier, the possibility to actually assess that anonymization techniques, methods, approaches are indeed satisfying GDPR and produce anonymous data accordingly. So this is something I'll come back a bit later on this. We try to put on because we believe it is very important. It can be seen as a very interesting mean to actually put forward actors that are doing things the right way. Sorry, not the wrong, obviously, and well, actually to help them distinguish themselves in a complicated and very competitive environment, and where you'll find providers of solutions, and some of them might be very, very bad, and some of them might be very, very good, and with very provided by very competent people. So if I go slightly into technicals still about anonymization, yet how do we do this certification? Well. Elisabetta also mentioned it, but we base our work on the Article 29 Working Party opinion, and that states that there are two ways to actually demonstrate that anonymization technique indeed provides anonymous data. So the first way is to actually meet the three criteria that are listed in the opinion. So the non-singling, not the possibility not to single out an individual, the impossibility to link records between different data sets, and last but not least, the impossibility to infer knowledge with a more than average chance for this, which is obviously a bit of a fuzzy definition, but still, these criteria are quite interesting and prove their robustness. And the other way that is actually interesting, because there's no real template to do so, but I believe that we nowadays are more and more leaning toward that mean to assess that. Anonymization techniques are indeed providing anonymous data, is to actually lead re-identification risk analysis and show that indeed the risk of re-identification are negligible or nil. And just to let you know, I believe a lot of you already know, but the EDPB is actually currently revising this guidance and should provide within coming month, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so, a new version of these guidelines. I believe that there'll be some changes. The core base will remain from my understanding. To go a bit more into specifics, I wanted to highlight just 3 examples of solutions that we had to see in my department. So as Carlo mentioned just when I arrived, I'm deputy head of technology expertise department, and we have a team of 15 people with various backgrounds, and some of them are specialists in anonymized technologies, and we sometimes for this certification and this anonymization assessment have to look into details on how this is done. So you have here 3 examples of anonymization method that were submitted to us. So the first one is from a big telco company. I mentioned them because they've gone public about it, so that's no problem. The first one, and it's just examples, but is by a big telco company that wanted to measure the flow of population, for instance, with mobile data localized on specific territories. For instance, for a festival, see the attendance, measure if people are coming back or not, etc., etc., over a limited period of time, from a few days or 1 or 2 weeks. Also, we have seen anonymization techniques for the use of medical records and the use for research, and which is obviously a big need. And finally, also another technique for anonymization of big big database, a big utility database, a bit of more generic solution. Which is, and I want to highlight this, one of the complicated thing to do when you do the assessment is that, as I said, anonymization is data processing, and for this, when you do the assessment, it's very complicated to do this for generic solutions, because obviously when a solution provider, they don't want to have this assessment, they don't want to say, oh, we can do this for any kind of data set. And actually, when we look into it, we have to know a bit more about on what kind of data types does it apply, and more specifically, how are the fields going to be structured, what kind of data, what's the granularity, and then we can actually work on it. So we have to sometimes narrow a bit the problem to be able to perform correctly this assessment. And now I come to the question of synthetic data. So as it has been explained, but I believe Daniele may be explaining way more way deeper the principles. But basically, you have first a data set of personal data, and what you want is to modelize the statistic population of it, and derive a model. Nowadays, mostly using machine learning techniques. And then, once you have this model, what you want to do is to use it and to generate this synthetic data, and that will create profiles, populations that actually should theoretically not represent any existing individual. So obviously, and it has been stated before, there are many very interesting opportunities, but so I listed them. I'm not necessarily going on it, but for us on the data protection standpoint, the question is, well, where do we set the bar with these technologies that actually are coming into the more and more into the industry, and we have to look into, and that is it anonymous data? Is it pseudonymized data? And this is, as I said, a very complicated thing, and it's in fact much more complicated to do and to assess than it is for traditional anonymization techniques. And also, as we said, there are many risks that can be identified, and we have to be very careful about this. Obviously, biases and underrepresentation of populations. Also the utility, because as we said, for the data generation to correctly work and be sure that you are not recreating personal data in a way, you have to be careful with what we call outliers, meaning that individuals in populations that are very specific. So sometimes you want to get rid of them and not consider them. But in some cases, and for instance, medical, the healthcare sector, it is very interesting to consider outliers because they will bring you a lot of knowledge. So how do you actually combine the two of them? And also, the last but not least, we also, and we see it a lot on a very connex subject with generative AI, there's also the risk of false inference. If you provide a data set to someone, and the person doesn't know that it's actually a synthetic data set, he might actually do inferences about people and think he recognizes someone in this data set, and infer what he thinks is knowledge, while it is actually not the case. So the information of the fact that people are actually dealing with synthetic data sets is it's obviously very important. To conclude, and because I don't want to take too much time, but I think we'll have a nice discussion following, we at the CNIL believe synthetic data generation is a very, very good practice, is very, very interesting. As I said, it's very complicated to assess that it's actually producing anonymous data or not, and that is a thing we are working on it. As I said, the issue we have, we have an ongoing activity, as I said, of certification of anonymous solution, and we are more and more question about the providers of a solution for data synthesis, and we work in this direction. So we've worked on a case more specifically. I don't want to name it because they've not gone public about it. So I will not share their identity. But it was very interesting. It has to be noted that when we exchange with companies in this way, it is quite a long thing because, well, we have to look into it. We have numerous exchanges. We try to understand exactly how things are done. Also, what is sometimes complicated, as I said, is that we have to deal with generic solutions, and in some cases we have to make sure that we narrow the field sufficiently to be able to actually certify something precisely, I mean. And finally, also, and because I think this is DPAs cannot obviously have not all the knowledge of the world and cannot do everything by their own. And what we did in these specific cases I was mentioning is that we relied also on the academia and the company actually published a paper in a very well-known conference, and it helped to actually assess the validity of the proposed criteria by also having peer-reviewed by academics of these methods. You can do peer reviewing. You have also interesting ways to do so, such as bug bounties, for instance, and opening the code of your data synthesis and asking people to actually attack it and see how it comes. So this is where I'm going to stop. We didn't publish yet much guidance, but on the website of our laboratory that we have, we published a series of articles that are unfortunately in French. So if you read French, you might find them very interesting. It's by my colleague, that is privacy technologist Alexis Léautier, and we will obviously carry on with this work. Thank you very much, and ready for your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Félicen. I really for the work that the Data Protection Authority in France is doing in shedding some lights on this, and the accuracy of this research that you keep doing in analyzing practical cases, and of course, I think for the audience will be very interesting to give a look to them and get inspired for more. You mentioned that synthetic data are not equals. I mean, depends on how they are made. So I would conclude this the first round with who actually makes this synthetic data. So Daniele Panfilo, CEO of Aindo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carlo. Where's the remote? Okay, thanks. First of all, thank you all, and thanks for the invitation. It's very nice for me to be here today and see that many people speaking about synthetic data. When we started back in 2018, this was really a rare topic in a conversation, while I see now after a few years this is raising, the awareness around this concept is rising, and more people are speaking about this, and this definitely means that this is of interest in many aspects, as we believe. And in the upcoming minutes, I will give you just a quick introduction about who we are, and basically, I won't speak much about that, but more about the technology itself. It's good that I come as the last one, because I've had the opportunity to hear also a few concerns from the audience, few concerns from the previous speakers, and I will try to address them in these few slides, and eventually at the end, if I didn't answer your question, happy to keep on replying. So I'm just give a quick overview about us. We are a startup of the International School for Advanced Studies, ISSA, which is a PhD school in mathematics, physics, and engineering, and neuroscience, based in Trieste, in Italy. And we are focused, as Carlo mentioned, in the generation of synthetic data. We started in 2018 with this idea. Our idea was to foster AI adoption into the market, and we realized that one of the major concerns, one of the major challenges when bringing innovation, when actually trying to develop something innovative, with our huge surprise, because we stem from a technical background and a technical field, we realized that the problem was not to develop the best algorithm or to create the best technology ever, but actually the challenge was to having access to data. Access to data is always very complicated. So at the time, we were focused on generative models, even though, as Elisabetta correctly mentioned, the word synthetic data is, I think, a bit older. We believe that a huge boost in generating synthetic data actually was driven by the appearance of generative model in academia, which belong more or less 2015, 2016. So in very short, what is synthetic data? I've seen many good definitions already about the technology, and I will just try to give you a very easy understanding. The idea is that first of all, we have been talking about different types of synthetic data. We have been talking about images. Synthetic data can be video. Synthetic data can be also audio. We specifically are a team of people focused on generating of tabular data. So we have a table, and this table is composed by individuals. You have information about these individuals. And what we want to do is to create another table that is different from the original table that you had in your hand at the beginning, but on the same time has a very peculiar properties. This table is completely artificial, and we will see that how this is generated. There are different means to generate these tables. But while being artificial, so void of any real information, so imagine you have 10 people, now you have 10 synthetic people, the statistic and the properties of these people are the same. Therefore, the utility, the information, I would say, behavior and the patterns contained in the previous table are now injected into artificial table composed of artificial patients. So the idea is very easy. There are different means to generate that. As I said, that you can do this type of generation using generative model, which is what we actually do. And also there are differences within artificial intelligence generative models. You can use GAN or VI, but this is a bit too technical. The idea is that either you can generate and to generate this data using generative model, you have to start from the real data, as Anna actually mentioned before. So you start from the original table, you train a model over this table, and at the end of training, you have a model capable of generating samples, examples actually, of the original table that are not contained into the original table, but they behave like those contained in the table. And this is one method. Another is by simulation. So you can use other approaches that do not look into the real data. You have to give knowledge to your model to say, okay, I know that my population distributes as this. I know that the average of age is this one. And then you can train a system to generate out of blue new data that behave according to the knowledge that you are giving to the system. We in particular use generative models, so we start from the real table, we train the model is trained, and now we generate data that are as useful as the original, but new. Why we believe this can be really helpful, why we imagine this can actually help and come in handy in many situations. First of all, the data that are created by the means of generative model really have a huge degree of realism. Even though I heard accuracy and I heard some good concern regarding to accuracy and so on, we believed, and I will show with some kind of figures, that this is one of the best methods in order to generate data that maintain properties of the original one, so that keep the accuracy. That really looks like the original table. If you want a parallel example in images, I don't know if any of you have heard, but there is this funny website called This Person Does Not Exist. And if you can Google it and you can go on it, and every time you load the page, you see an image of a person, and this person does not exist indeed, but it looks like a real person. Then we have seen that the application of such type of technology can really have many different use cases. We have been collaborating and investigating application and use cases in a variety of industries, ranging from healthcare, financial, telco. Basically, anyone that hear the potential and the possibility to actually use their data in a safer manner, it's definitely interested in this, and we believe this can really come in handy also in sharing, possibility to share data in a more, I would say, friendly and safe way. And then, as I said, we are going now into the basically hot topic, because how we can ensure that the data generated using artificial intelligence model are indeed safe? This is a question that we get every time, because we say, okay, we can provide you with synthetic data that are as good as the original, but they are actually, I don't like to use this word, but I will, they are fake data at the end, but they're as good as the original. And the question we always get is, how do you know? How do you know that these data are indeed safe and are indeed useful? Well, we devised a framework in order to assess the goodness of the data that we generate. And basically, we look into 3 dimensions. We have privacy. So this is, I believe, what most of the audience is interested in. So the idea is we want that this data, that the data we generate are good, but at the end of the day, we are not revealing any information. We are not really giving out, leaking any sensitive information, and we are not exposing our data to risks. And to do so, we devised a huge set of, I would say, we have a list of attacks that we conduct against our data, our synthetic data, in order to ensure that this data is actually not linkable, that you cannot really identify any person in this data, and so on. Then the other, I would say, the other dimension of investigation is fidelity. What we want is that, of course, statistical importance of the real data is maintained into the synthetic data. So in order to do so, we inspect different statistical measurements, and we measure the distance between these, the statistics evaluated over the real data and the statistics evaluated over the synthetic data. And if we do our job correctly, ideally, this distance is quite small. Last but not least, it's utility, which actually we differentiate from fidelity. And utility is, okay, now let's say that I've heard that most of the application come in the direction of training AI models. So you want to generate synthetic data because you want to exchange this data with somebody. And most likely the guy that is going to, the institution, the person that is going to receive the synthetic data, want to get the synthetic data, train an AI model, and then most likely taking the AI model trained over the synthetic data, being a classifier, a fraud detection system, whatever it is, and use it in production over the real data. So the idea, this kind of, we call this property model compatibility. We want this the model trained over the synthetic data be useful over the real data that I actually have at home. And that's what we do. We actually take synthetic data, we train a model of it, and we test the performance of the model trained over the synthetic over the real, actually, in order to then assess the differences and see if the model performed correctly. Here, very quickly, I want to give in the last few slides ideas of which are the average performance we get. This is not, I would say, private data. This is an open data set that everybody can inspect and can collect from UCI Learning Repository. And in particular, we see here with this data is a data set, is a table composed of about 50K records, so 50 people. 50K people, and about 14 columns. And in this case, we have trained very easily. A data set like this can be generated, can be synthesized in really, I would say, matter of a minute or two, something like that. So you have an original data that is private, that's composed of many features and many records. You connect a model, a synthesis model, and in 1 minute, you have an artificial copy of such type of data. And here we have compared with, we have compared the privacy measurements, so the attacks against our synthetic data with standard anonymization techniques. And in this case, as you can see, actually there is a huge improvement in terms of performances when it comes to security. This is for one table, of course. You can imagine this concept to be extended also to multi-table. So we don't only generate one singular table, but this concept can be extended to the generation of relational data sets, relational databases. And this opens up even a bigger set of opportunities when it comes to sharing and giving the possibility to have access to data. Then, okay, fidelity. As I said at the beginning, what we're looking here is that, okay, now we generate the data, we want to see how the generated data look like in terms of statistics and how these compare with the original data. So this is just a couple of examples of the metrics that we evaluate. On the top, you have correlations between the variable in the real table, and on the right, you have correlation in the variable in the synthetic table. As you can see, you don't have to be really an expert in statistics to see that the two actually looks very much the same. If you're not satisfied with the visual appealing, of course, we compare quantitative metrics in order to assess the real distance between these two metrics. In particular, actually here the distance is very, very slow. It's very, very small, sorry, 0.02. Then we have other inspection like marginal distribution. So we see how each column behaves. So the average age distribution, if you have the column age in the table, and so on. Gender distribution in the table, and so on. And then we compare the distances. As you can see, these are just a couple of examples. Generally speaking, if your system is well trained, really the fidelity of the model of the data that you achieve is very impressive. Last but not least, as I said at the beginning, you have to evaluate the compatibility. So what we do here is we compare the model trained over the synthetic. We calculate some kind of KPIs, like could be accuracy. I've heard we have other means like Rossi, marginal, and so on. But the idea is that you take a model, train over the synthetic, take the same model, train over the real data, check how they behave and how they compare. Even in these cases, we are able to show that actually there is a huge fidelity between the accuracy that you would score with a model trained over the real data and the accuracy that you would score with a model trained over the synthetic data. You might argue that it's not 100%. That's correct, indeed 100%. But I would say that from a statistical point of view, if I would see 100% even in real data, I would be actually worrying because something is going wrong. Generally, if you want to forecast something, if you want to foresee something, you don't. It's very, very rare, apart in certain cases, that you score 100% result, because there should be some kind of variability. Otherwise, the task you're doing, it's actually pointless. That being said, in these cases, we have compared the performances of 3 different models, trained over real and synthetic, and you can see that their general ratio between the accuracy that you score between real data and synthetic data stem above 90% on average. So this is, there are a lot of topics. I think this was the last slide. Yes, there are a lot of topics I would like to address. Also biases. I've heard, if I have 1 minute more, but the idea is that I've heard that synthetic data are not very good in, I would say, reproducing outlier, which is indeed a very good point. But the question I would say is why you need outliers. If you need outliers, which was a very good distinction, then you can use synthetic data to augment the outlier population. And this come in handy in terms of data augmentation. If, like in many industrial cases, outliers, for instance, are not of interest because they are noise, indeed there is no statistics into the outlier, then the filtering process could come in handy. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniele, really on being so accurate in explaining us how these data are made and how important is to check the fidelity, the utility, and therefore the safeguards related to this. So I would like, we have already a comment on this, so please, I don't know if you have. There is a microphone. Okay. Great.
No, great. I have so many questions, but I think I limited to 2. I think you have questions as well. So, Félicen, for you, 1 question. You said you already did the assessments for Orange and 2 other companies if this specific data set is actually anonymized. Question, are these companies coming proactively to the CNIL saying, hey, we would like to do this population flow use case, please CNIL, can you test, can you do the assessment? Or is it more retroactive that you see, oh, Orange is doing some interesting things here, let's dig deeper, let's send them a questionnaire, and then we do the assessment? That was 1 question. And then Daniele is super interesting. I found the slides very impressive. 1 question, you said, of course, you always need the real data sets. So then if you work for a company, then you would receive the data set, or how does it work in practice? So maybe you first, and then more the practical question.
Okay, so I'll answer for my part. So it's a bit of both. So sometimes we have to look into anonymization techniques because we have to investigate and in this case, yes, it's more of a retroactive action, but in some cases it is actually because the organizations, the companies, they actually want our advice, and it's among the missions we have at the CNIL, and we try to fulfill to accompany actors in this sense. The only thing I can add is that obviously it's complicated. It is a service we try to offer, and obviously to anyone, but we have to, yes, it's complicated because it takes, as I said, a lot of time. We cannot necessarily always satisfy everybody, but we try to.
In this audience, it seems like that you will have a lot of clients already.
Thank you, and a very, very good question. Actually, this is one of the point in which one of the tricky point of the technology. You say, but if I have to give you the data, I am to the starting point again. We are working on a solution that actually run on-prem. So we just install the solution on customer premises. This means that the real data never leave the company. And we're working a lot in making this, I would say, very plug and play. Because as you can imagine, in some cases, there might be the need of our, I would say, initial setup, but we're working towards a kind of an automation in the setup as well that would actually eliminate our presence in the game. We just give them the software, they install the software. At the moment, we install the software on their machine, but we actually have to set up the solution yet still.
But you actually don't have access to the real data set?
No.
Okay, interesting. Good.
Thanks. Just the schema, just some kind of information about the data.
Great. I also have a question for Félicen about the standard. Do you think that, and to Elisabetta as well, do you think there is, it's already time for a kind of design standard designed by the data protection authorities, maybe following the Article 29 opinion revision that is ongoing on synthetic data? Are we already ready for that, or?
I don't know, but maybe Elisabetta, you want to start?
No, please start.
Okay. Well, it's a complicated question, obviously. The difficult thing we have is that these technologies, they can apply to many data sets, as we said, images, audio files, tabular data of any kind. And I think it's very complicated to... we tried to, but actually and we wanted to see if at the CNIL we could actually ask someone to do the certification on our, for us. But actually going from the principles of the Article 29 Working Party and tomorrow of the ADPB, from something that is much more actually practical is very, very complicated, because it should be very, very restricted to some specific fields with specification of kind of data sets you deal with. Otherwise, it's very, yes, it's difficult. So we might go in this direction. Maybe not in the near future. I think we still have a lot to learn from the experience, but maybe.
Okay. Okay. So from a data protection perspective, as was also mentioned before during the panel, I think it would be really great to see the guidance by the DPB on synthetic data, even because the opinion on anonymization by the Article 29 was some time ago already. And as another note to add, I think that synthetic data are being increasingly used also beyond data protection. So, for example, as I was saying during my presentation, using synthetic data to test medical devices, this needs to be addressed as well, because this goes for safety of the users. And also, for example, I've been involved in also a work about AI medicinal life cycle product, and also there, if you use synthetic data to, for example, study drugs, are being used, how you could test in the virtual population. Also, this, I think, needs to be addressed by the regulator, how it has to be used, which kind of data, how they are generated, how they are shared, because this as well goes with
a lot of work for the regulators, looks like. So I open up the floor for questions. I see already there is someone with the microphone in line. If all the others can be there, so we can have a line and follow the order. Sorry for that.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, Michael Veal from UCL. Two short questions. First one is if we know that synthetic data, at least in some cases, is personal data, still, because it's pseudonymized rather than anonymized, would that mean, in view of the CNIL or other organizations, that the generating models used for this data are also personal data? Because otherwise you get the absurd situation that you could say, move a generative model across borders without law applying and then regenerates personal data on the other side. So models are personal data. What did the panel think about that? And secondly, in response to the last slides, I mean, they're very flashy, but I think it's quite misleading to use a data set of only 14 variables. And it's also misleading to look at pairwise analysis, because almost all big data applications today are looking at data sets with hundreds or thousands of variables where pairwise analysis is totally insufficient to understand outliers. So maybe you could address how your similarity works when you're looking at potentially a combinatorial combination of hundreds, thousands, or to the powers of 10, many, many more potential combinations, which synthetic data, we know from the literature, is good at losing and ignoring. Thanks.
Who wants to take this?
I reply for. Thank you. Very good point. Actually, that's a toy example over 14 variables. We've been publishing actually other article using many more variables. Of course, we didn't test this in the span of hundreds, thousands of columns. This, of course, would generate problems, but we have evidence in using with thousands of columns, which still we are able to perform quite good. This is also not only in the case of a singular table. We have also devised metrics to compare, I would say, fidelity, accuracy, and other properties among more tables. But happy to share with you also our latest publication in these fields to see that we keep, okay, I mean, this is still in 14 columns, but we can keep, I would say, a good level of quality, even if we extend this to 1,000. Of course, higher we go, then the quality degrade with the amount of data and the amount of columns. But generally, if we are talking the amount of data in terms of records, this is not a problem. That gets complicated with more columns than with more records. This is because if you have more records, I mean, you can downsample in the worst case, or otherwise you can use it, and you're not adding information after a certain point. When it comes to column, then I agree with you. There are limitations yet in the fields, but we are exploring. We are always investigating and trying to move research further. Thank you.
Oh, I can try to. Well, it's going to be a try for the first question, because it's obviously a complicated one, but well identified and well discussed, and by yourself, I believe. So indeed, the status of AI model more generally is very complicated, and also because, well, we have a very binary approach with the GDPR. Either it's anonymous or it's personal data. If we did with this kind of data, obviously, and it's complicated in the case of AI models, because you would like to consider them as anonymous, but we've all seen that it's possible to do some membership inference. It's possible to do some model inversion. All these kind of things have been demonstrated by a lot of researchers in the last 10 years or so. So, well, we do not have a really position yet, but I believe somehow to advance and make sure that also we do not because there is a kind of a potential risk, consider that all AI models trained on personal data are personal data, and therefore it's complicated. You cannot share them, you cannot send them away. It would be very complicated stand to take, and it would actually affect a lot of the businesses and research, I believe. Might be some kind of a position to find in between, saying that guidance to provide to how should training be performed, what are the safeguards to be put in place. So, for instance, very obvious, but pseudonymize the data on which you do the training to help minimize the possibility of do some inversion or inference, and maybe take the principle that models can be considered anonymous unless it's proven that they are not, but if they follow the correct guidance. But that's why it's just ideas, and I'd be happy to discuss them with you that we have.
Thank you for these insights, and we have two last questions.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for these great discussions. I would like to maybe point out to Elisabetta or to also Félicen Like taking into account the benefits of synthetic data and like in sectors where privacy has a huge impact, such as medical sector and like in terms of like research and development, the benefits for that. If we take the example, for instance, of clinical trials, where sometimes the sponsors, who is the data controller of the data, in most of the cases do not even have the real data, like the key identifiers. What will be your opinion if such a company will instruct a third party, like Aindo, for instance, like that is generating data, that is a third party who will then just generate this synthetic data without giving even again back the key identifiers to the sponsors, so that you could consider that as anonymous data. So basically be able to offer this as a service where companies that would like to have research and development will give up this personal data and like put it into a third party. What will be your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's an interesting question and quite complex. That I think for this question I like to take some time. But first of all, the first things that I'm thinking that it boils down also as well whether you consider those data that are provided as anonymous based on the risks on re-identification. So, as I was saying in my former presentation, probably also in light of industry, in light of ACJ's decision, most probably will be more and more by industry intended as such, so intended as anonymized. So I think in that respect, from the data protection point of view, from the other point of view, so I think it would be an interesting application. It requires broader analysis, in my opinion, what this implies, because, for example, it depends which kind of data are you using, which kind of population are you addressing, and all the things also related to data quality, so beyond data protection. But I think this opportunity should be explored with all the cautions that come from healthcare testing. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Last question, we're running out of time, so thank you very much.
I will keep it short. Simon Hania, Data Protection Officer at Uber. We've been talking about GDPR scope and anonymous, and then implicitly the competence of authorities. But actually what we're doing is we're taking data from real people in a population and then create through magic a synthetic data set on a lookalike population and then try to reapply that to the real world. Now, if we drop the fundamental rights protection in GDPR during that course, then there could be a void in the protection of fundamental rights on this reapplication. So would you agree with me that we need the notion of a synthetic data impact assessment upon the point in time when it gets reapplied to the real world? And do you think the AI Act, with its new notions of fundamental rights impact assessment, would provide sufficient coverage of an obligation to do so? And will there be adequate independent supervision of that? Or do we need to work on additional regulation which takes the notion of DPIAs, translates it into fundamental rights assessment, or call it a synthetic data impact assessment, which at a mandatory level needs to be conducted before synthetic data is allowed to be applied on real people in the real world with real world effects? Whoever wants to take
a synthetic and very complex question. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting question. Who wants to discuss it? Félicen or Anna?
No, that's okay. I can start, but actually, I think it's very, very interesting question, and I cannot say I ever thought really in these terms, but I find it very, very interesting. I do not have much to add to the hints you made. Indeed, well, indeed, the idea of the impact assessment is actually very interesting, and in the wake of the AI Act and the adoption by the Euro deputies a couple of weeks ago, that could indeed be very interesting. But I'd be happy to discuss more of this with you, because it's very it took me by surprise.
Simon, you always come with these super intellectual questions. I appreciate that. So thinking of that we might need a third type of assessment sounds a bit weird to me. So right now we have data protection impact assessments and privacy, I mean the lower level privacy impact assessments. Now we are thinking of implementing AI risk assessments. Then we have transfer impact assessments. So having synthetic impact assessments sounds to me like if we do that, at one point we might need metaverse, whatever impact assessments and NFT impact assessments. That sounds a bit wild to me. So I think from a company and also from a regulator perspective, I would like to keep things simple, and because then it gets the best adoption in the market. What if, I mean, I haven't thought that through. I only had this 30 seconds after you asked the question, or maybe 1 minute during you were speaking. Can't we say that this use case you just described would be already covered under the normal data protection impact assessment and AI risk assessment? Because the two assessments have different purposes. The data protection impact assessment has the purpose, I mean, very broadly speaking, to protect personal information. And the AI risk assessment in the future, or whoever already implemented that, has the purpose to prevent harm, harmful impact, harmful decisions, bias, high-risk use cases from an AI perspective. I think we are already well covered if we apply the two different assessments to that use case. Because if we apply the data protection impact or privacy risk assessments, we are protecting from a data protection privacy perspective. And if we apply this AI risk assessment, I mean, there's AI included. So I think it would make sense to include that. And then we are protected from the bias ethical point of view. So just thinking, I'm just thinking from a company perspective to keep things easy, because if things are too complicated, we won't adopt it on a day-to-day basis. But maybe you have already thoughts about that. And it should be, you know, technology agnostic.
No. If you want to reply, of course, your question is really interesting. So
the point I'm making is that I currently see a potential void on the reapplication of synthetic data to individuals, to groups of individuals, because I think it's not covered by GDPR. There is no mandatory obligation. It's the right thing to do, to consider what you do, what effect it has, because we want to achieve societal benefits. That was on the slide. How do we avoid societal harm?
Covered by GDPR, because you do something with a personal data set. So, I don't agree, Simon. Why isn't that covered by GDPR? Because you want to do something with so you have the real data set, you produce synthetic data, and then you reapply that to the real data set. And when you do something with a real data set, GDPR applies. So then it falls back into the scope. So then the question is, whatever I'm doing with this real data set, is that good from a privacy and potentially from an AI perspective? So I don't see, I don't think there's a void. Sorry, maybe we need to discuss that over the coffee break. I don't know. I mean, but it's a very, very valid question.
I think we really ran out of time. Thank you very much. And join me in giving a great applause to this great panel. Thank you.